Welcome to the Low Carb Conferences podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jeff Gerber. Today, our special guest is Kashif Kahn, who goes by Kash. He's the CEO and founder of the DNA Company. It's an honor to have him and his company exhibiting and also sponsoring the speaker VIP audience dinner on Saturday evening at the conference this February. So how's it going today, Kash?
Oh, it's amazing. We're up here in Toronto, just battling the cold, but I'm still wearing shorts.
Yeah, well,
I'm not going to give
we,
up.
yeah, it's not terribly cold, but we had a foot of snow here last night in Denver.
Oh, wow. I'm really excited to come there for the skiing. I grew up in Vancouver, skiing on like Whistler and beautiful mountains. Then I moved to Toronto, and some people said, "Let's go skiing." And I was like, "Where's the mountain? I don't see it." They said, "It's right there in front of you." That speed bump? Like, what are you talking about? So, anyways,
Yeah, well, we'd love to have you come skiing with us in Vail. And usually in February, there's not a whole lot of snow down here in the valley in Denver. And we hope all the snow stays up in Vail
yeah.
for the conference. But a little more about Kash. Kash is a biohacker, entrepreneur, speaker, author, podcaster, innovator, CEO, and founder of the DNA Company, and is a world leading functional genomics researcher. He has pioneered unique insights into the human genome, functional genomics, and personal health. Growing up in Vancouver, Canada, in an immigrant household, Kashif developed an industrious entrepreneurial spirit from a young age. Prior to his tenure at the DNA Company, Kashif advised a number of high growth startups in a variety of industries. So, Kash, if you can provide some more background and tell us about your personal and professional interests and your passion looking at functional genomics and how it relates to personal health.
Well, for sure. Like, I came from such a different world that I never thought I would be working on health and wellness. And like most people that are in this sort of functional space, it comes from like an origin story of healing yourself and then wanting to heal others, and that's what happened to me. So I'm 43. In my late 30s, I had every problem you could name, and that was the first time I had ever been sick. So I never had experiences with the dog other than allergies and things when you're young, but overall I was fairly healthy. Then all of a sudden I had eczema, psoriasis. I had crazy, horrible migraines, couldn't get out of bed, couldn't work, depression issues, gut issues. And so all of that, I was asking questions of the clinicians where I was hoping to find out why. I didn't understand that that wasn't part of the toolkit to dig into why is this stuff happening as opposed to what do we call it and what pill do I give you? My first experience having gone through all that. And so that pushed me down this, journey of how do I figure out what happened? Like all this happened at the same time. There must be something going wrong. It's food, something I wasn't doing right. So I had to self-discover. And it was first through functional medicine that I learned there was more. You could dig into root cause. Then it was through my own personal genome that I discovered there were certain genetic instructions that were just completely broken in my human genetic code, which caused me to react to my environment a little differently than my business partners and peers who didn't have these problems. And so I got labeled as sick, where it was just genetically incapable of dealing with what was actually pollution, by the way, just so you know. There was a manufacturing company downstairs in our office building that was putting toxic pollutants into the airways for which I had poor genetic ability to clear. And so the inflammatory load that caused and the trickle of chronic exposure over time, leading to eventually eczema, this inflammatory issue, migraines, neural inflammation, psoriasis, autoimmune, and then depression because of my neurochemicals we can talk about. So all that's been resolved. I'm healthier than I've ever been. And that's when I walked away from my business. We were in a marketing company. We helped startups grow, like you talked about. That's what we did. And I said, forget about all that. I found meaning. This needs to be in everyone's hand. And so we built the DNA company, funded some research, and now we're in a position where we're helping hundreds and hundreds of people every month.
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, I'm kind of thinking 10 years ago, who was doing this type of genomic testing and what kind of genomic testing pointed to pollutants?
Yeah. And that's the big challenge is that genetics didn't solve the big problems. So genetics, which was funded by pharma, was only looking for disease-centric solutions. Tons and billions of dollars of research, put in, but the solutions, really impactful solutions for very small problems. So rare genetic conditions, which were very hard to deal with, but they needed these solutions. Meanwhile, the big problems, according to the CDC, Center for Disease Control, 90% of our $4 trillion healthcare budget is spent on chronic disease, none of which you need to have. You're not born with Alzheimer's and breast cancer and diabetes issues. These things all happen later in life because you have the wrong habits, misaligned to your genome, which cause these problems. So that's where I thought, how do I take this human instruction manual that's been decoded and apply it to these big things? And it didn't end at DNA. And that's where to put it in a nutshell, you have to understand the genome. That was already done. You then have to understand the epigenetics of environment, nutrition, lifestyle. And when you combine those things, what's the net result? And that's how you deal with chronic disease. That's how you deal with aging. That's how you deal with optimal performance and energy and sleep and all those other things. There's no sleep gene. There's no, diabetes gene. There's insulin response and starch metabolization, low carb, for example, and how do people deal with those? So that's kind of how we looked at things more functionally. Here's the map. Here's the things that people do. When you put them together, they either experience extreme health or extreme illness. And we mapped all that out.
Yeah, so the expression of the gene is really, really critical and crucial, and mainstream medicine, as you pointed out, really did miss out on that. And as a physician, when we learned about genetic testing, typically we would look at things such as genetic genes for cancer, breast cancer, BRCA,
Yeah.
and so forth. And like you said, it was really looking at the genome in terms of therapies, medical therapies,
Yes.
pharma, surgery, all that kind of stuff, but not really taking a deeper dive into functional aspects and the expression of the gene.
So BRCA is a perfect example. And let's use that to paint the picture of what we're saying. Genetics versus functional genomics. Genetics is you have a certain version of the BRCA gene, which means we think that you have higher risk of breast cancer, which means as a prevention, you should likely cut a piece of yourself off. That's genetics, right? And if you ask the clinician that gave that advice, what does BRCA do? And the person who decided to go cut something off, they probably don't know. They just know that there's some data published out there that says higher risk of breast cancer. BRCA doesn't cause breast cancer. BRCA is a tumor suppressor. So if you, God forbid, got breast cancer, it's supposed to go fix it. It's actually protective. It's the thing that repairs DNA, repairs cells, and fights tumors. If you have the bad version, you just have a bad repair tool. So what we're actually saying is less likely to survive breast cancer, less likely to fight it. But we still didn't ask, why did you get it in the first place? That's functional genomics. So functional genomics is if we look at this population, I say, of women that have breast cancer, primarily in the menopause age, not always, but usually, there's some women which are hormonally more estrogen dominant. So in their hormone cascade, the hormones that we all make, men and women do the same thing. Women just do it monthly, men do it daily. Some women just net out a lot more estrogen. And with the genes, we can determine what's going on there. What do you actually make? That's step 1 of 3. Step 2 is what quality do you make? Is it toxic? So there's 3 potential metabolites, 2, 4, or 16 hydroxyestrogens is what they're called. 2 is the great clean stuff that you want. 4 and 16 are potent toxins. 16 being more toxic than 4. Some women are estrogen dominant and estrogen toxic. Again, genetically, we can predetermine that. When you then know you're making that toxin, there's certain detox systems that need to kick in, like glutathionization, antioxidation, methylation, glucuronidation. These are 4 major processes that help your body get rid of the nonsense. Some women don't do that well, and we can pick that apart. Where are you actually failing? So a woman may be estrogen dominant, estrogen toxic with poor detox response. Here's now your profile, as opposed to a gene, a profile of a woman that truly has risk, but even then maybe didn't get sick. We still need to look at the epigenetics. 85% of North American women will be on a birth control pill for some 5 to 10 years or 15 years length of period time, adding more estrogen to that estrogen fire. So many women, as they age, get into hormone replacement therapy, adding more estrogen. So many women don't understand the hormone disruptors in their environment, the chemicals, pesticides, Teflon coated frying pans, all the stuff around them that mimic hormones as they enter the body, pushing the dial up on that estrogen toxicity threat. That's the woman that has the profile with the poor habits to now equal the problem. Why? And now we go back to the very first thing I said about menopause. You no longer have a menstrual cycle when you're menopausal, which means this monthly load of toxins you're not getting rid of. You still have a monthly cycle, you just don't have a period anymore. And the body notices this threat, this estrogen toxicity free flowing in the bloodstream, a potent toxin that would cause inflammation. So it wants to protect you, and it takes it out of the vasculature, out of the blood, and it goes and stores it in fat. And where do women have fat? In the hips and in the breasts, primarily. I mean, there's fat everywhere, but those are two big areas where things could very easily get deposited. And the breasts, unlike the lungs and unlike the gut that were designed to deal with things coming in that need to be sort of filtered, the glands of, the milk ducts, etc., were not designed for this level of toxic threat. So now you have the source, you have the epigenetic load, which exaggerates this. You have the biology of a menopausal woman, and that toxic threat causing that level of inflammation that leads to cellular damage, that leads to breast cancer. This is the point where BRCA is supposed to get to work. After all of this. So now saying BRCA is the thing we need to look at is like, what about all this stuff? I could give me your 5-year-old granddaughter, and I could test her and tell you all of this about her and prevent all of this from happening. And BRCA doesn't need to do its job at that point. Right. So this is how we think of things more functionally. Like in reality, why does the disease even happen? And if we can answer that question, we can reverse or we can prevent, as opposed to wait and see and fight it.
Yeah. And that's just a great explanation. I think BRCA is really just spot on in terms of discussion. And some of the families traditionally they're just, oh, that's it. I'm really worried. We're going to talk to my doctor about a double mastectomy, and you're basically saying, wait a minute, there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah. You get the double mastectomy. You haven't stopped the estrogen toxicity load. You haven't stopped your epigenetic habits. And guess what? It's just going to become ovarian cancer instead. So you didn't get rid of the fire. You just, you moved away from it. It's just following you, and it's going to eventually, if you have that inflammatory load and you haven't dealt with that, you got rid of the breast, which is just a jurisdiction. It's a site where this could potentially happen. It's still going to happen somewhere else if you haven't dealt with that risk factor. And this is where then you start to associate breast cancer is associated with ovarian cancer. Like, no, let's just figure out why it happens. Let's deal with the why, and then it doesn't have to happen.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that makes certainly a lot of sense. Now, indirectly, I don't think you intended to say this, but it's kind of an argument that estrogen therapies, being exposed to estrogen throughout life and perhaps after menopause may be something beneficial to look at.
Yeah, so hormone replacement therapy, bigger than it's ever been. There's compounding pharmacies all over the country making up cocktails for people. Highly beneficial if you personalize it. Highly problematic if you don't. So I'll give you another example. I'm in Toronto, so this is the sort of mecca for hockey training, right? All the NHL players come here. We have all the great trainers here, and they're here every offseason to train. So we deal with a lot of them in terms of how do we up their performance to another level: muscle, fat burning, recovery, mental, their stamina, all this type of stuff. So we had this phenomenon. This was in 2019, where a bunch of these players were coming to us, saying that they had weird libido issues, and they had like gynecomastia, man boobs growing, and we're like, why all of a sudden all these guys? So we started looking at it, and at that time there was a couple trainers who were giving everybody what's called an androgel pack, so a testosterone supplement, which is a gel you put on your stomach, your skin absorbs it, and the thinking is, I give you testosterone, you have more testosterone, which should be beneficial for an athlete. Some men in that hormone cascade take that testosterone gene called CYP, I think 19A1, converts it into estrogen at different speeds and rates. Some men do that exceedingly fast. So if I give you more testosterone, I'm give you more of the fuel that your body then genetically takes and converts into estrogen. So now some of these men who weren't recovering properly, didn't have the energy, vitality, etc., were given this testosterone, and it didn't help. So the answer was, maybe you need more. Let's up the dose. What happened? gynomastia, man boobs, libido out the door. They had beautiful skin and hair. They started to look very pretty, but what they wanted, the outcome wasn't there. So a little tweak, it wasn't about giving them more testosterone. It's about let's block the conversion to estrogen, which you can do with basic supplements to have more free flowing testosterone, which you already make. So all of that stuff, like what you were alluding to with hormones, highly impactful, highly powerful. But we're saying if you look at the genetic map of how hormones work, you can very precisely know where to intervene to get that optimal outcome, prevent all the problems, and get exactly what you want.
Great, Cash. Well, let me ask you in terms of functional genomics, does being homozygous and heterozygous play into the equation?
Yeah, it depends what we're looking at. So for example, if we talk about the brain, there's no good or bad. There's context, right? So if we say that there's a particular gene where homo or heterozygous equals different things. So for example, BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, implicit in neuroplasticity. How well does your brain develop neural connections to flow information, to learn new skills, manage your mood, etc.? We call it the optimal and suboptimal version, the homo versus the heterozygous. But really it's a question of context, because there's no good or bad depending what you're trying to do with it. So the optimal version, I have really good neuroplasticity, I develop really good neural pathways. Great. So I can be the jack of all trades. I can learn a lot I might be the entrepreneur who does the legal, the accounting, the marketing. I do it all, but I do them all kind of at 80%, versus the person that's hetero that has a suboptimal, that has a bit of a challenge developing new neural pathways and learning new. So they're more the subject matter expert. Now, if you let these people do what they're designed for, they're going to thrive. If you get them to try and do something that they weren't designed for, it's going to feel like a problem. Right? So that person that is a multitasker, that is a multi-prioritizer, put them in that place and they are going to be optimal. Try and get them to write a book and be that subject matter expert and just sit in a lab all day and research. They're going to crash and burn. So this is where we look at, again, the functional aspect of it doesn't end at the genes. We need to understand the genes to know who you are. Then we have to look at the epigenetic habits, lifestyle, environment, nutrition. Let's match those things up and give you your best outcome, because we're all somewhat different genetically. There's 8 billion of us that are wired a little different. So it's just understanding who am I at the brain, at the heart, at the hormones, at the detox level, at the inflammation level, and then what should I be doing? And then I'll be at my best.
Great. So, just to explain the neuroplasticity and the whether you're homozygous or heterozygous, in that example, you're saying you could be homozygous in a good way. So, homozygous means that you have two alleles of the same thing,
Yes.
versus heterozygous, where you may have one good allele, one bad allele, but it can also work in the opposite way. But again, it doesn't, you could be homozygous good or homozygous bad. It doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily mean that you're going to have a bad outcome, the epigenetics and
Yeah.
all
We
this
just need to
other.
understand exactly. We need to understand what that means in physiology. So it can't end at the genetics where you have the bad gene, you don't do this job well. What does that equal in my body, my outcome? Because it's not necessarily bad. It's like, what am I designed for? It's kind of like saying a Ferrari is a great car, beautiful, amazing car. Try taking it off roading. It's not going to work out that well, right? And try saying that a Jeep Wrangler is not as good as a Ferrari. It's a bad car. Yeah, maybe racing on the track, but on that off road, it's going to plow it away. Like it's so that's what am I designed to do? We all have these innate superpowers, and our challenge is we all wake up and have the exact same life. We wake up, go to work, do this stuff, deal with the family, eat, go to sleep at the same time with the same circadian rhythm, you know, versus understanding who am I on the outside and designing my life around that to be my best. Because I might be designed to be a professional athlete. I might not. Your child who you're saying go play football, right? What if they are not, they don't have enough estrogen, which is misunderstood, to actually give them the mass and strength. Estrogen is where that mass comes from. That big burly figure requires estrogen, right? How well do they bind their testosterone so that they get the energy and the strength? So if you start to understand who am I, you know what you're designed for, and if you go do that thing, you're going to be the best at it. You go do the thing you're not designed for, it's not going to work out so well.
So that's a great analogy. And I'm learning as we talk, but over the years I've spoken to my patients and they've come in with all kinds of genetic testing. And my response is it's really interesting. We're learning, we don't know everything. And they point their fingers. I have this bad gene. I have that bad gene. Oh my God, I'm doomed. And I kind of
Yeah.
have to step back and I have to say, let's talk about this. So how do you deal with that?
So I say that that first step is very important. That here's my bad gene, right? But that's the very beginning. That's not the end. It's not a prescription for a problem. What it is here's where I need to focus. Here's my priority. So, for example, something like methylation, which a lot of people talk about in genetics, methylation is two things. It's sending methyl groups to a toxin to make it water soluble. So, kind of dealing with inflammation is really what it's known for. And second is managing your epigenetic expression. So, you have a gene that's doing a job based on what you're exposed to, what you ate, what you smelt, what chemicals you breathe, the gene may speed up or slow down. So epigenetic expression, how well is that being tuned, right? So methylation manages that. So if you don't manage methylation properly, you could end up with inflammation, headaches, skin issues, malaise, mood and behavior issues because systems aren't firing properly overall, head to toe. And so we look at this gene called MTHFR, very well-known methylation gene that everybody talks about, and they'll come into a clinic like yours and say, I have the MTHFR gene. Everybody has the MTHFR gene, right? So they have a certain version of it, like I'm doomed. This is no. What this means is how do you metabolize B12? Do you need folic acid or do you need folinic acid? Do you need to take some SAMe? Do you need to take your B12 sublingually under the tongue, or do you need to swallow it as a pill? It's not just MTHFR. Just like I spoke of others, we look at things in the systems that they actually exist. So methylation is not one gene, it's a baton pass of multiple steps. And if you don't understand each step, you see this chain, but you don't know which link is weak. And that's the only place where you need to focus. So genetics, step one is just here's the priority. Here's the job that my body doesn't do well. Right? That's all we're saying. Or my body's doing a little too well, which could also be a problem. My body is overdoing this job. Now, what does that equal? Let's start to look at biology, which we already understand. We already understand how all these systems work and what do they equal. Now I know what to do. Here's a supplement I need to take. Here's the exercise I shouldn't do. Some people can't handle cardiovascular activity because they don't deal with oxidative stress so well, right? Here's what I should eat. Speaking of low carb, how do I metabolize carbs and fats and vegan foods and etc.? I now know red flag doesn't mean I'm doomed. It means I know where to focus and what to do.
Great. Well, I had on my list to query you about methylation. And I also had the list here just to, if you could briefly mention talking about diet, lifestyle, cardiovascular
Sure.
risk, familial hypercholesterolemia, and, genetic
Yeah.
testing for that, and also genetic testing for ApoE and the
Yeah.
significance
So
of
that's a
those.
big one where, again, really misunderstood. Such an easy place, low hanging fruit to affect change if you truly understood what's going on, as opposed to I have family risk. Typically, the family risk isn't rooted in cardiovascular disease, it's rooted in other things that eventually lead to cardiovascular disease. So, as an example, we can determine genetically what quality of hardware you have. Most cardiovascular disease doesn't happen in the heart. It's usually the arteries. They get calcified, cholesterolemia, blockage, buildup, all that stuff. The heart is ticking and doing fine up until the very last minute, where that artery just got worse and worse and worse in terms of its quality and health. Right. So we can determine here's your artery. The inner lining is called the endothelium. Right. That's where the blood actually touches and flows. What quality do you have? Is it stainless steel, resilient, or is it paper thin and really prone to inflammation? Even if you have the worst quality, you weren't born sick. You still have to have the wrong epigenetic choices to cause a problem. So, what are those things? If, like me, you're missing some of the key glutathione genes, detox genes, and perhaps you work in an environment with a lot of chemicals. So, you're breathing in chemicals every day and your body doesn't do a good job of binding and sending to the liver those chemicals, just like we drink alcohol and we get rid of the alcohol and we feel better. Your body's doing that with everything, with mold, chemicals, airborne, even what you eat, for etc. So now I had this combination of I don't detoxify well, my methylation isn't the best, so the inflammation that's being caused by those toxins isn't being fought so well, and I have this bad quality endothelium, meaning it can get inflamed really easily, and I have these ingredients already that point to me being in an inflammatory state, and I happen to have the work or home environment where I'm exposed to those things that cause that inflammation. The body's response to inflammation here, which you can now assume this person probably has, is to actually deploy cholesterol to this region as like a Vaseline lubricant to reduce the inflammation. That's what the body does, right? Inflammation here, send cholesterol. Now, speaking of ApoE, some people either efficiently or highly inefficiently do that process. How do I transport lipids around in my body, cholesterol? And if you can determine with ApoE how well you do that. So that's another layer, functional layer of, okay, your ApoE is also off. So now not only are you sending a lot of cholesterol here, but you don't move it around so well. And we know the reason why you sent it there in the first place was because of the toxins in your blood. Guess what happens when cholesterol meets toxicity and oxidation? It oxidizes itself and it hardens and deposits and builds up. So this stuff starts happening 15 years before your doctor tells you that you have a heart problem, right? It takes years and years. Your body's resilient and it will fight. And typically by the time you're 55-ish is when you have your first chronic disease. Because after the age of 50, your mitochondria fall off a cliff. You start to lose your mitochondria, and that resiliency, that cellular resiliency, really drops. So that fight that's been going on for years and years and years, you can't do it anymore. And so there's multiple ways to go about this. Let's support the detox. Let's support the endothelium with the right supplements. There's things that actually can specifically target this. Let's support your mitochondria and make you more resilient. And all of a sudden, this disease didn't have to happen. Right? It's truly, it sounds that simple, but it is. And we've taken people off of Lipitor. We've taken people off of cholesterol pills over and over and over again because we don't worry about this disease. We worry about the root, all these other things, and then this sort of dissipates and goes away.
I love the explanation, and so this is what I've tried to do again with my patients is uh, reassure them that this is just your genetic footprint, and we have to deal with it. Some people
Yeah.
we have to be more strict about the diet and the lifestyle and the things that we're going to entertain. Some are less at risk. And a funny story. A couple years back, I had the opportunity to meet with Dr. Bredesen, and I went up to him and I said, regarding my ApoE status, hey, Dr. Bredesen, my ApoE status is 2.2. And I was bragging
Right.
to him instead of, the concern is if you're ApoE 4.4. And he replied back to me. He said, well, Jeff, your ApoE22 says that you're highly evolved. There's only 80,000 people. And I said, well, I don't know personally if I'm highly evolved, but it was just, he didn't give me a free ride. He said, you still have other risk. Maybe it's not
Yeah.
heart disease or dementia. I certainly have my own memory issues as I get older. But again, it was just you have to take it in context and looking
Yeah.
at
It
diet and
has to be in
lifestyle.
context. Has to be in context. Like even just talking about what is good or bad ApoE, even the context of we're only saying ApoE 4.4 is bad in today's reality. The reason why ApoE 4.4 existed is because it was actually highly protective of our ancestors, meaning that we have chronic, ongoing, everyday acute inflammatory insults. Our ancestors used to have once in a while acute problem, cut myself with a knife, went to battle, came home, dropped a hammer on my hand, whatever. It wasn't this chronic stress, bad sleep, bad food, threat every day, all day. And so they needed that ApoE 4.4 as that acute response and like overdo the job, right? And so those people would actually thrive in that context. Now, in today's context, where there's a constant drip of inflammation in everything you're doing, what you eat, what you breathe, the stress, the lack of sleep, like everything, it's too much. And the ApoE 3.3 is the ideal for today. So context is super, super, super important. That's why, genes are not like a prescription. They're more like, here's what you do. Now, what's going on? What are your choices? Where are you putting all this stuff?
Yeah, so it's like our our genetics haven't really caught up in terms of our lifestyle and
No,
diet. Although for me, the
no.
APO E22 perhaps has caught up. I don't know, but it's all
Yeah, you're a bit of a
fascinating.
superhuman.
Yeah,
You're a bit of a superhuman.
thank you, but I really doubt that. So yeah, so you know, two other things to get into is back in the day we had 23andMe, and there's
Hmm.
so many options, and so the question is, what is unique about your company? Why do people want to seek you out, and what's different between 23andMe and what you have to offer?
So the me coming in from the outside, and I think this was really important, is that the genetic industry, the products, the science, the research was all designed by geneticists who were very gene centric and focused on genes. And then you end up with companies like 23andMe that tell you what version of what gene you have, but can't give you an action plan. They don't believe that there's an action plan for like the way we just described for hormones, etc. The reason why we're able to do this is because I first did it for myself. So I realized that the genes weren't enough. I needed to know now what are the genes telling me to do. And so we spent 3 years studying 7,000 people, one by one by one by one, to understand N of one. How do I actually help you? And then how do I help you? And then how do I help you? And then how do I help you? Hands on for months at a time. And we started to document all these avatars, called these profiles, like the ones I've been describing. And then when you have this profile of, say, for the example, that breast cancer profile in a woman, you now know what problems are tied to it, and you also know what solutions are tied to it. And all of a sudden, I can give you action. It's actionable versus this like propensity based, you have an 80% chance of Alzheimer's. What do I do with that? Like just sit here and wait and see? And if I don't get it, great. Versus, okay, you have this elevated risk of Alzheimer's because the protective genes aren't doing their job. What causes Alzheimer's? And how well are you doing with that stuff? Today, we find that the majority, I think it's something like 66% now of today's Alzheimer's is airborne, meaning that there's so much pollution in the big cities we live in, and we're just living longer. So the opportunity for cognitive decline to set in and for neural pathways to get damaged and degrade over time because of all of what we're breathing in that we don't detoxify properly. LA traffic, 1 hour LA traffic is like a pack of cigarettes, literally. So if that's what you're doing every day and you're also living to 90, then yeah, your brain's going to have a bit of a challenge as you age. So we need to understand why that for some people that's the why. For some people it's actually related to carbs and insulin response. For some people it's their gut. They don't have the right protective genes around their gut that prevent toxins from entering the bloodstream, which lead to permeability and leaky gut, which leads to leaky brain, right? For some people, it's the ApoE, it's the way they deal with transport of lipids. So it's this propensity based genetics, which was what is good for research, good for developing medication and drugs. It's not good for reversing and preventing chronic diseases and slowing down aging and giving you optimal performance. That's what we do entirely differently, and most geneticists don't even believe that's what genetics will inform because that's not what they're taught, right? So we had to sort of create our own science around that.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Well, back in the day, which is my second point, and you can comment on this, is that there was there was FDA regulation on what 23andMe were doing. Now, you're basically describing you're an end-to-end solution. You evaluate the genes and then you provide solutions as to how to address it. I know with 23andMe early on, we would have patients do testing, and then we would run the genome through another company such as Prometheus. And
Right.
what I never understood is that, well, Prometheus could take a deeper dive, but the 23andMe could not. And the regulation was related to you're not establishing a doctor-patient relationship. You're not allowed to diagnose and treat, and not necessarily prescribe, but maybe it's loosened up a little bit. How is it that your company is able to do an end-to-end thing as you described?
Well, first of all, we're thinking about how to solve problems very differently. So the problem with FDA was identify a breast cancer gene and work on a breast cancer solution. That requires clinical intervention. It requires prescription. It requires regulation. We're not doing that. We're saying we're identifying a gap in your hormones. We're identifying a gap in your detox system. We're identifying a gap in your ability to transport lipids. We're identifying a gap in your endothelium quality. We're just going to solve that. We're not concerned about the symptom. But we know if we solve that, the symptoms go away. There's these central hubs, these systems. Then there's really six core systems, or I should say five, that we deal with: cardiovascular, everything around how all of that works; hormones, everything about your brain and neurochemicals; everything around immunity and detox, so the innate cellular health; and then diet and nutrition, how metabolic health. And if you look at these five things, most chronic diseases are rooted in these five buckets. So if we can fix these five hubs and make you optimal in them, the spokes of the diseases go away. We don't even need to talk to you about the disease. So that being said, obviously people have a problem. They're either trying to prevent, reverse, feel better, whatever it is. A lot of it has to do with sort of longevity. I want to add 15 healthy years to my life, and not years in a hospital bed, but years playing with my grandchildren and with the energy and vitality I had when I was 25, that type of thinking. And so we feel that everybody got it wrong, which is, how do we make this a clinical product, which is just more of the same, symptom masking? We're saying that's the problem to begin with. The problem is that this amazing acute care health system we have, if I break my arm and I go to the hospital, I'm going to get the best service that we've ever had in the history of human civilization. If I have stage 4 cancer, I'm going to get treated better than we've ever been able to do that. But that same thinking is applied to my diabetes, which is not how diabetes works. Right. So that's what we're doing differently. We're saying, forget about the diabetes. We know why diabetes happens. Let's focus on that. And that doesn't require medication, prescription. It requires working on systems, supplementation, diet, exercise, like the right choices and all of those things. The symptom goes away.
Yeah, so you're really in the realm of functional health and
Yes,
nutrition, and this is an area where the FDA says, okay, you're not diagnosing, prescribing, or treating.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
so that makes a lot of sense. And so again, it's end to end. And so just having a look at your website, you provide test kits, and the individuals can do the full testing, and the analysis comes back. My question is, do you still see individuals in person? Is there consultations that are part of your services in addition to just the detail
Yeah.
analysis?
What we've tried to do is we've tried to make the report, so our reports don't look like a typical genetic report. Genetic reports are, here's what version of what gene you have, and maybe here's some data around what that means. We more speak to anxiety, depression, keto diet, hair loss. Like, these are the things that I actually understand and need to deal with. And my genes are going to inform how my body's doing that. And now I know where to focus to fix that problem. If it comes to depression, I may know why I feel depressed, and my why may be different than somebody else's why. So that's step one, is the reports are easy to digest. You don't need a PhD to analyze them for you. The second answer is, when it comes to a clinical issue like, hey, my mom had breast cancer, I don't want it. We do have programs where people can work with our functional genomics practitioners who have been trained on thinking the way we think. And there's a mixture everywhere from MDs down to personal trainers, depending what the need is. I need to get my fitness right, or I need to deal with my prostate cancer. So we have different levels of people that have been trained, and there's sort of two levels of programs. Here's my problem, I need to fix it, or give me everything, mine my DNA, and here's the problems I need to fix, and fix the problems that I didn't even know that I had. Prevent the stuff coming 10 years down the road. And that's really what we do. There's a test where you can self-serve, learn. If you implement the changes that are suggested, take the supplements, make the diet changes that are suggested, you will be a better version of yourself. Or, I need someone to work on this problem. Great, we can do that. Or, I'm an executive high performer, biohacker. I want to do everything I could possibly do. We have programs where we'll dive deep and we'll spend months with somebody on that.
Excellent. So back to basics. What if somebody wants to know about their DNA relatives?
Ah. So genealogy is really cool. I mean, it's an awesome thing. I've explored it myself. I found out growing up as a South Asian Afghani, Pakistani, Middle Eastern mutt that I actually have some Irish ancestry, which really blew me. Like, where did that guy come from? You know? Yeah,
That's no hair.
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, our algorithms don't inform that, but I think it's an important tool to understand. There's certain really nuanced things. For example, when we talk about uh, insulin response, and what do you think of? Sugar is bad, right? Sugar causes diabetes. That's the general thinking. When you look at South Asian people like myself, Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, we have the same outcome from saturated fats, which is not in the published literature. For us, the way that we genetically deal with saturated fats will cause an insulin response and spike, which will equal diabetes over long term, the same way it does in Western European white people from sugar. We also have the sugar problem. Don't get me wrong there. Like they're both there, but we have this unique genetic nuance. So we don't look at ancestry in the terms of telling you who you are, but we look at it to inform the algorithm to make it more personalized, right? And because there are some subtle nuances like that, like with hypertension, the hypertension genes around what is considered the optimal outcome for white Western Europeans is considered the worst possible outcome for East Asians, like Chinese, Vietnamese. So there's nuances like that we look at.
Yeah. So look, I don't need genetics testing, although you have it now to describe, Asian populations that can become diabetic without a significant amount of weight gain, and we refer to
Right.
them as a population of TOFI, thin on the outside, fat on the inside, meaning that
Right.
they're metabolically unhealthy and not overweight. And so you say there's genetic markers for that.
Yeah, there's a couple things going on there. One is for sure the saturated fats, but second thing is you'll find that Eastern populations, on average, have less ability to have strong detox pathways. So, the Europeans went through industrialization, like they actually went through it. Industrialization sort of happened in Europe. And so, alcohol, things like that, very European. You look at Asian countries, they kind of skipped all that, right? They didn't go through the multi-century process of evolving through it. And so the detox systems aren't there. And one of our coping mechanisms, our bodies know, and we talked about this earlier, like let's store the toxins in fat. And when you all of a sudden move from, Hong Kong to New York, or you move from a farm somewhere in Tibet, wherever, to like LA, and your lifestyle is completely changed, but your genetics haven't caught up to that, the toxic load, that burden is far too much for your genetic capacity. And that's where all of a sudden your body will store fat as a place to deposit the toxins to cope because it's shocked, it doesn't know what to do. And you have these people that are outwardly healthy, eating well, they go to the gym regularly, but you look at their liver and they have non-alcohol fatty liver syndrome and they don't even drink. Like what's going on? Why is their liver all fat? This is what's going on. Is their detox pathways are non-existent, and they're in an environment they're not designed for, and as a coping mechanism, their body's storing fat to put the toxin somewhere, and that's a very hard thing to reverse. If you're only dealing with the fat, you have to deal with the toxins. That's the root, right? So we have these nuances like that. This is where you ask a question about chronic disease and aging. Typically, we have a root cause answer. And this is what we learned from studying those 7,000 people.
Yeah, that's fantastic, the research that you've done. And just to clear things up with the audience, you know, people when they go and get a genetic testing, they figure they're going to check the entire genome. Wow, that's, I'm just a little saliva and check the
Yeah.
entire genome, but I don't think it quite works that way.
No, and I mean, for example, everybody here probably knows Dave Asprey, Bulletproof Coffee, now Danger Coffee and Upgrade Labs and he's the father of biohacking, right? So when we first met him, he had done this $50,000 full genome sequence. He flew out to Germany for it, met with these three PhDs to go over it, and there's 22,000 genes that make up your genome. So he got the whole thing done. They gave him this encyclopedia. We test for less than 100 because those are the 100 that actually affect those 5 core systems I'm talking about. And he said he learned more in 1 hour from our 100 genes than he did in a 1 week deep dive trip to Germany with these three PhDs, other than rare genetic conditions that he could potentially have, coming down the road. Um, because genetics, like I said, is not how traditionally wasn't um, interpreted around chronic disease and aging. It was interpreted around rare genetic conditions. And that's why this needle in the haystack approach, more is better. Let's scan your whole genome and put AI on it and go find something. You probably already know you have that thing, right? It's like, how do I prevent breast cancer is much more impactful.
So yeah, it's perfect. It's so applicable to our community of nutrition and functional minded people. And so it's really looking at a targeted genome. So you're not going to look at your DNA relatives, and you're not going to get the Dave Asprey 22,000 full genetic workup.
Yeah. And if you got that, your head would spin for a little while and you end up where you started. Like,
Yeah, and I guess 23andMe really took again, they're not testing the entire genome. They
no.
they just took a wild shoot at maybe more than 100 specific, but
Yeah.
um,
I think
I
they're looking, I don't know exactly, but it's approximately 1,000. And it's kind of the things that have enough published data where there's something to talk about, right? It's like, here's something that's correlated to breast cancer, here's something that's related to like fast muscle twitch fiber, here's something that's related to like snacking tendency and satiety, those types of things. So some of it is useful, a lot of it needs more action around it. But they've taken sort of the best of the whole genome sequence and compressed it into here's what we can actually talk about.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I've learned a lot, and now I really understand the niche of the DNA company, and where you fall in. And, I'm really excited and looking forward. We've never had a DNA company come to our conference, and you will be pleasantly surprised. We have so many people that will definitely come and visit. And again, I want to thank you and your company for being so generous and sponsoring the VIP dinner as well.
No, we love the work you're doing. As soon as I saw what you guys were all about, I said, this is exactly like, this is our world. We need to meet these people and be part of it. And we wanted to sponsor right away.
Yeah, well, look, I don't know if you will personally be there, but I'd love you to
Yes,
come
I'll
and
be
we
there.
can go skiing, and
Yeah.
so we'll be in touch on that. And how can the audience find out more about you, Kash?
So there's a few things you can do. For the testing, it's the DNAcompany.com. It's called the 360 test. So just go look at the DNA 360 test. And my sample report is actually on the website. If you go to the homepage, if you want to see what it looks like. The other thing is, if you just want to learn more, and this is a big part of our mission, is just education and normalizing the fact that DNA is a part of your toolkit and should be. There's two ways. Go to my Instagram, so Kash Kahn Official, KashKhan, Kash Kahn Official, and we're constantly posting information there about how your genome can inform better health. Or go to our podcast. It's called Unpilled, so the Unpilled podcast, and we're constantly taking whatever relevant health topics are and understanding them from the genetic level so people can personalize things a little bit. And we're constantly hearing like, oh, now I finally understand why I feel the way I feel, you know. So those are the ways we can help. Dive in or just connect, email us through the website and have any questions, we're here to help.
Great, Crash. And last two things. What do you enjoy most about personally coming to these conferences, and both from a personal perspective, and also if you have a message for other exhibitors that are considering joining us?
Yeah, I find that whenever someone is doing something unique and powerful and something that's needed, like we speak at a lot of conferences because of course the nature of what we know is so unique and so needed in this health and wellness space that it's relevant in a lot of places. And it's like every time there's people crying, there's people just like in awe of like, I wish I knew this 10 years ago. Right? I wish I knew this for my daughter. I wish like the anxiety pill she's been on, or like those kinds of stories. And that's why we continue, like I said, even just the education, putting it out there, the impact and how much change can be impacted in chronic disease, aging, all these big problems that we're dealing with. And that's why we love to be at all these conferences and just share and teach and speak and get people educated. The impact is huge versus what people get when they have to go to their doctor and say, this is how I feel. What pill do I take? And that's exactly why any innovator that's out there that is doing anything unique and special, you gotta be a part of a group like this, because these it's going to start with, like, we call it early adopters, but it's more, I don't call it early adopters in health. It's more like I've been disappointed in everything I've tried. So it's not like early adoption. It's like I'm looking for an answer. Someone please help me. And that's typically where you end up in a community like this, and then you self-heal, and then you thrive, and you understand there's a different way. So the more we can work together and make the community stronger, and build our own, call it, healthcare system outside of the system that we're truly healthy, the better we'll all be. And that's why we love to participate.
Great. And so the DNA company will be at our event as an exhibitor and a sponsor, and we have some other great exhibitors. And again, we invite other exhibitors to the event. We're about 2 months away. So also we have a great lineup of speakers. And as we always say, if you want to support nutrition science, consider coming to our event. And to learn more about our event, please visit lowcarbconferences.com. So that's all for now. It's great to meet you, Kash, and perhaps you'll join us for some skiing in February.
I'd love to. I'm looking forward to it. Can't wait.